Revolutionary greetings. Haki Shakur, back at you once again on another great day of resistance from our story of the new African nation. On this day, 280 years ago, today's topic is about the Great Stono Rebellion, aka Cato's Rebellion. I wanted to touch on this topic real quick because I wanted to touch on this special freedom fighter, this great freedom fighter from Angola, who's rarely talked about, whose name is not rarely known amongst our people here in slave land America. Um, he should be, you know what I'm saying, venerated up there with the great freedom fighters like Nat Turner, Gabriel Prosser, Denmark Vesey, Charles Desalon, Quelo, Mingo. I mean, all the great freedom fighters who uprise here in North America during the slavery periods of time, chattel slavery periods of time. So I really wanted to do this video because I want people to get familiar with this great freedom fighter, and also freedom fighters like Robert Farabee of the Maroons, the Dismal Swamp Maroons, great freedom fighters like that. So I just wanted to touch on this great freedom fighter who goes by the name Jemmy, but they also call him Cato. So I really wanted to get into this topic. Like I said, on September 9th, 1739, 280 years ago, the great Jemmy, Angolan freedom fighter, led 76 to 100 Africans, enslaved Africans, to uprise on this day. And what makes the day so unique is that, like I'm always explaining to people, is that Sunday, this particular rebellion happened on a Sunday. And the thing about Sundays is that a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of these great rebellions, they say it's over 280 to 300 recorded slave rebellions in the history of slave land America. A lot of rebellions were undocumented that has never been recorded. So it's many, many more rebellions to that. So, you know, our ancestors been resistance ever since we came on the boats. So we've been always fighting for independence, sovereignty, and to get back to who we are as an African people, new African people, which is true freedom. Sundays are unique because a lot of these great freedom fighters and ancestors used to always meet up on Sundays and plot, plan, and strategize slave rebellions. So this particular rebellion in South Carolina, just outside of Charleston, off the Stono River, they passed a law in 1739, particularly pertaining to the slave plantation owners, that they were passing in a law that every slave plantation owner had to carry arms and guns with them to church in fear of a slave insurrection, a slave rebellion coming from Africans throughout the South or wherever they may have been enslaved. So in South Carolina, the colony of South Carolina, the British colony at this time, this particular law was supposed to go in effect September 29th, 1739. So as you can see, the great freedom fighter Jemmy and his comrades and African ancestors took advantage of that because they knew they had to rebel before that law came into passing legislation. So they made their move today, 280 years ago. And let me remind you, this rebellion is before the Haitian Revolution. This rebellion is before the Nat Turner slave rebellion. This is before the Gabriel Prosser slave rebellion. This is before the Denmark Vesey slave rebellion. This rebellion is one of the earliest recorded slave rebellions in the British English North America and North American continent, period. Because, you know, just before that is the 1525 slave rebellion that took place also in South Carolina in 1525 in the Spanish colony, when the native indigenous nations and the Africans rose up against those oppressors and those settlers. This was the next one that took place, led by Jemmy. So on this day, Jemmy and probably like the first 20 of these African ancestors chose to raid these two stores. They raided these two stores, they gathered the arms, and they started to travel south. They headed south to burn plantations, kill white people, kill plantation owners, things of that nature, and free enslaved new Africans out of slavery. So as they making their way south, um, others start to join this rebellion from other plantations. That's what pushed the numbers up to like 76 to 100 African ancestors that participated in this rebellion, and they started to march south with this flag. This is before Gabriel Prosser did the death or liberty thing when he was going to march with the death or liberty flag. These great ancestors had a flag that they raised, said liberty. They wanted liberty, freedom, sovereignty. You see what I'm saying? And to be free again. So as they headed south, they were trying to get to the Gracia del um, the Gracia Real de Santa Teresa Fort Mose, which was a independent New African community that was established by enslaved African ancestors a year before that by the great Francisco Menendez, another great freedom fighter that you need to look up. This was an independent free community that the Spanish had in Spanish Florida, excuse me, that a lot of our ancestors escaped to. See, this is the area that all the ancestors were trying to escape to from Gula Geechee territory. They were trying to make it to Spanish colony Florida, Spanish Florida, because they were granted freedom by the Spanish. You see what I'm saying? And native indigenous nations, because I don't want to leave them out either, was granting them freedom also down there in Spanish Florida. So all these great ancestors and a lot of these early rebellions really were taking place for Africans to make it to Florida. So Jemmy and his comrades and a lot of these African ancestors that participated in this rebellion came from the kingdom of Ndongo and the kingdom of the Congo. So these were Angolan and Congolese African ancestors who uprised on this day 280 years ago. So I just wanted to bring that to y'all because this is powerful. This is one of the slave rebellions and slave insurrections they try to suppress and repress and try to keep secret, so you won't teach your kids about this great slave rebellion. And they don't teach this rebellion in school. It's not in a lot of texts. It's like one of the most suppressed rebellions, early rebellions in North America. Also, I wanted to state that the theme of all these rebellions is what? Nationhood. Trying to liberate land and to establish nationhood. Because this is all our African ancestors knew was nationhood, independence, and sovereignty. So, as they were making their way south, the militia was called up. As in every rebellion that you know out through history, they called up the militia. Jemmy and them got into combat with the militia that was called up. They battled it out for a while, and eventually Jemmy and these great ancestors lost the battle. And a lot of these ancestors, like Jemmy, were killed, executed, hung, heads cut off, put on posts. If you go to South Carolina, you will see the Great Stono Rebellion kind of like a memorial to those ancestors who had their head chopped off and was put on these stakes, so to put fear in other ancestors so they wouldn't rebel and uprise no more. A lot of these ancestors were sold out of the colony. This was another tactic that the plantation owners used, was to sell ancestors out of the South and off the plantations to the West Indies, which is the Caribbean islands. So a lot of these ancestors were sold to the West Indies and Caribbean islands, but the majority of them was executed. So I just wanted to come to y'all today and give salutations to the great Jemmy. Let's venerate his name. Let's mention his name in rituals. Let's venerate this great ancestor. Let's invoke this ancestor to continue to walk with the struggle of new African people and a new African nation. So I just want to say, Ise to the great freedom fighter Cato, aka Jemmy, and all those great ancestors who rose up today, September 9th, 280 years ago. By any means necessary, they wanted their freedom. So let's continue to uplift these ancestors and tell these stories and tell our stories. I'm going to sign off on that note. Haki Shakur, free the land by any means necessary.